Hey guys, hey Cool Gamer. Hope you're doing well. Oh, sorry, I've been MIA. Just my animals keep getting sick. I got sick. I've been sick. It's annoying for me being sick because I'm always sick, but for my babies, my gosh. You okay, girl? Wanna come cuddle? There. So, anyways, I need to get a move on with this book, Chaos, because well, I'm only in the beginning of it. And I really need to get moving on it. I want to read it all. I've got so many books that I've bought that I need to read. I've got oh my gosh, I've got Jill Duggar's book, I've got Britney Spears's book, I've got Foxhole Farm, the other UFO book that I was supposed to read, this one. Like so many. Anyways, I'll get started. Just read until more people come in. Okay, so this one is titled Asshole Buddies. Rudy Altobelli, the owner of the house in Cielo Drive, Tate and Polanski's landlord, and Terry Melcher's before that, became one of my best sources. It was thanks to him that I started looking into Melcher's story in the first place. When I met up with Altobelli in the spring of 1999, he had never publicly spoken about the murders that had occurred at his house, except in trial testimony. I wasn't sure why he'd agree to talk now, and to me, of all people. I heard it would be a waste of time even to bother asking, but Altobelli had always been unpredictable. One of the first openly gay men in Hollywood, he made a living as a manager, his clients including Henry Fonda and Katharine Hepburn. In November 1969, 3 months after the murders, before the killers had been found, he shocked the community by filing a lawsuit against Polanski and Sharon Tate's father, who to recover the damages his property had sustained during the murders. Oh my gosh, who does that? I had no idea that he sued her father and Roman. It was an appalling, callous response to seek money from a victim's family because she'd bled on Altobelli's carpet as she lay dying. That is awful. Oh my God. I knew then that I'd have to tread carefully with Altobelli. True to old Hollywood form, he suggested we meet at Musso and Frank Grill, a legendary outpost that looked right out of a film noir. Many of its red-jacketed waiters seemed so old that they could have been working there when it opened in 1919. One of them led me through the wood-paneled room, past red banquets to Altobelli at a corner table, already treating himself to the first in succession of Gibsons, with extra onions. I have no idea what that is. Gibson's, isn't that like a whiskey or something? And maybe the onions mean pickled onions that you put in? Like with martinis, they have olives? I don't know. That's my guess. Compact and Natalie dressed, he was a few weeks shy of his 70th birthday, but he had no lines on his face and no gray in his hair. Admiredly vain, or admittedly vain, he began all our meetings by asking, "How do I look?" It came before even a hello. His glasses were always tinted, on some days blue, on others pink, orange, or light purple. After dinner that night, he kept calling to chat, and I took him out for years to come. What? After dinner that night, he kept calling to chat, and I took him out for years to come. Oh, okay. The restaurants were always fancy, the bills were always mine, and I always felt through hundreds of hours of conversation that I wasn't getting the whole story. His go-to defense was unchanging. I may not tell you everything, but I have never lied to you. Robert Town, who wrote the screenplay for Chinatown, called Altobelli the most honest man in Hollywood. A low bar to clear, maybe, but I take what I could get. If I printed anything without his permission, he said, I'll find you and cut your balls off and feed him to you. That's lovely. Fortunately, he later decided it was all on record. Altobelli had bought this yellow house in 1963. In May 1966, he rented to Terry Melcher, who was known at the time for having produced The Birds, The Tambourine Man, and Turn, Turn, Turn. Altobelli liked to befriend his tenants. He'd live in the guest house and rent out the main property, and soon the two became what he called asshole buddies. An affectionate term, he assured me. Hey, Alberta. Hope you're doing good. Not only was Altobelli one of the few people who befriended both Melcher and Tate, he was one of the few who'd seen Manson on the property before the murders. He provided critical testimony for the state, identifying Manson as the man who barged into his guest house looking for Terry Melcher on March 23rd, 1969. His ID was reliable. He already met Manson at Dennis Wilson's house the summer before. He'd sat on Dennis's bed atop a dirty satin sheet with cum spots on it. I think I just saw her go to the front door, so she's looking out the window, and she just ate hard food. Like, she's only been eating canned food. I feed her that every morning, and then she eats treats, but I changed her hard food today, and I changed her litter to the, Yesterday's News, it's called, because her paw, it's an open wound, so that way the litter doesn't get stuck to it. I changed that, gave her new food, and she seems to be doing pretty good. She's still jumping up on my son's bed, that's usually where she stays, but she's out more. I can imagine the pain she must have been in and how long she'd been suffering. Poor girl. But now I know that with older cats, even dogs, like, you have to look at their nails because, yeah, if you don't see shedding nails all over like I do, there's something wrong. But I have 3 cats, so I didn't notice because my male named Ash and my other female named Dilly, like, they're only, what, 6? Yeah, I believe they're 6. Both of them are 6 and 7, and they still run around like terrors. Very much so, like, that they get the zoomies all the time, and I find their nails all over the place, like, I found them in my bed, the floor, the couch, the table, anywhere, right? Yeah, I'm learning that they're great at hiding pain. Oh my god, her paw was so swollen, like, and it just swelled within the past 3 days, and like I said, when I was looking at the bottom, I thought it was maybe a hard piece of cat litter stuck in her paw, like, in her pads or whatever. No, that was her freaking pad. Most of it had died, so they had to cut it all out, like, oh my god. I'm just happy that she's on, like, a 24-hour pain med, and she's got antibiotic shots as well, and she's going back to get her nails done every couple of months. That way, this never happens again. I'm glad I did too, and I'm glad I got in when I did because sometimes, unless it's emergency I told her it was emergency, I don't care. That's my baby. Only that is I'm not gonna sit there and let her, I don't know, like, limp like that, and plus I started hearing, like, every time she walked with that one foot, and I'm like, "So that's why I assumed something was stuck in it." I mean, I think anybody else would. I thought it was literally hard cat litter. I don't know. And then when the vet said no, she's like, "Oh, okay, I know what's going on. Her nails have curled under. They're curled now. And because she's older, she's not shedding, they're thicker, and they're going right into the pad." Poor baby. I'm just glad that she's better. And cats are pretty good at healing. Now I don't know where I was, but it's okay. We had just agreed with our vet to do just pain management for our older dog now instead of for cancer treatment. Oh, I'm sorry, girl. It's so hard. They're a family, they're our kids, right? So Altobelli liked to befriend his tenants. He'd live in the guest house and rent out the main property, and soon the two became what he called asshole buddies, an affectionate term, he assured me. Yeah, they are. Not only was Altobelli one of the few people who befriended both Melcher and Tate, he was one of the few who'd seen Manson on the property before the murders. He provided critical testimony for the state, identifying Manson as the man who barged into his guest house looking for Terry Melcher on March 23rd, 1969. His ID was reliable. He'd already met Manson at Dennis Wilson's house the summer before. He'd sat on Dennis's bed atop I already read that, dirty satin sheets with stains on them. Rudy told me while Manson sat on the floor playing music. I didn't like the vibe from him, Rudy added. I even told Terry to keep those people off the property. It sounded like Altobelli and others in his circle had suspected Manson from the start. And that was true, Altobelli said. When he heard about the murders, he thought of Manson right away. Altobelli was in Rome at the time, and his memories troubled him enough that within hours of the murders, before he'd even boarded a flight home, he called his lawyer, Barry Hirsch, who told him he should mind his own business. Altobelli returned to Los Angeles, hoping to move back into his house right away. The LAPD forbade him. Can you imagine? Yeah, you're the owner of that house, but Sharon and her friends were all like murdered in there, right? And he wants to move back. He wants to move back into his house right away, and then actually had the balls to charge Sharon Tate's father and Roman Polanski because Sharon bled on the floor from dying. I wow. And then he crashed with Melcher and Candace Bergen at their place in Malibu. That house belonged to Doris Day, Melcher's mother, but she seldom used it. During Altobelli's stay, Greg Jacobson stopped by and invited him for a walk on the beach. As they strolled along the surf, past beautiful oceanfront homes fortified in recent weeks with fences, guard dogs, and security systems. Yeah, and especially right away, they were the bodies are just taken away. Like, how could you be so cruel? Especially even like sue them for that? What the hell? So as I strolled along the strip with past beautiful oceanfront homes, fortified in recent weeks with fences, guard dogs, and security systems, Jacobson told him about the musician that Manson was supposed to have killed. Altobelli didn't remember the musician's name. I wondered if he was thinking of Gary Hinman, the musician who'd been killed by the family 13 days before the Tate and LaBianca murders. If Jacobson knew about that murder, he would have almost certainly connected the Tate LaBianca deaths to Manson too. The day on the beach, Jacobson reached into his pocket and pulled out a bullet. He said, "This one's for Terry." It was from Manson. Holy crap. Hi, SD. I'd say both. Both. Just disgusting, horrible. I mean, yeah, I don't get it. It's almost like self-righteous. Like, well, it's my house, so I'm gonna move in now that they've passed. I don't know. Altobelli didn't remember. Oh, I just read that. The strained credulity, as mentioned above, during the trial, Jacobson had said that after the murders, Manson broke into his house, gave him a bullet, and told him to show it to Dennis Wilson. The message. There are more where this came from. Maybe Altobelli was getting all of it mixed up, but he was insistent. No, he said it was for Terry, as in Terry Melcher. Then why didn't he tell Terry about it? Because when I told him to mind his own business by my attorney, I mind my own business. In fact, I should be minding my own business now and shut up. How could Altobelli have spent so much time with Melcher doing nothing but discussing the tragedy and speculating on possible culprits without sharing his crucial information, without telling his friend that there was a bullet with his name on it? He knew it would help solve the case. Altobelli did say that he called his attorney one more time to fill him in, and he was told again to mind his own business. Hirsch declined to comment. Yeah. Well, he's he's very conceited. He thinks that he's a very good-looking man. And every time apparently when this author met with him, he always his first thing instead of even saying hello, first thing he always said was, "How do I look?" He was that vain. Very into himself, very narcissistic. So people like that, I don't think, yeah, definitely don't believe in spirits or ghosts or anything like that. Hi, Herbie. And his lawyer, Hirsch, kept telling him not to comment, not to say anything, mind his business, which is stupid. That's Valley was telling the truth, and all four of these men, him, Melcher, Wilson from Beach Boys, and Jacobson, the main links between Manson, Hollywood, and the house on Cielo Drive, had to know that Manson was behind the murders, and yet all they wanted to do was forget about it. 3 weeks after the crimes, Altobelli moved back into the house on Cielo Drive with Melcher as with Terry Melcher as his new roommate, an arrangement that's never been reported before. Wow, I did not know that. Altobelli returned out of a desire to reclaim his home from the evil that infested it. So that's why he wanted it, because it was evil? Okay, so he does. uh, Wow. He hoped to restore some order to the place. By then, it had become a morbid mecca for Hollywood's elite, who came by wanting a glimpse at the scene of the crimes. Even Elvis Presley came by to pay his respects. I did not know that. Hey, Jill. I just started at like 8:05. So Elvis Presley apparently visited the crime scene at Cielo Drive. I did not know that. Oh, to pay his respects, not be an asshole. Altobello turned most of these visitors away, but he welcomed Melcher, who'd expressed a bizarre yearning to stay in his old place again. I don't know why the hell he'd want to stay there. The owner and Melcher, what the hell? So with Altobelli's blessing, Melcher lived there for a month, maybe longer. He hardly left the property. He probably figured it was safe there, Altobelli said, that lightning wouldn't strike twice. Melcher came alone. He seemed to have split up with Burgeon. Settling back into the house, he became morose, as Altobelli remembered, wandering around in a daze and drinking heavily. I would too, considering what happened though. Are you serious? How do you forget that? That's awful. Can you bring her back tomorrow? Poor girl. Another friend, the screenwriter Charles Eastman, who lived several doors down on Cielo Drive, said that Meltzer showed up at his place wearing Wojciech Frykowski's clothing. What the? This is weird. I said, this is too gruesome, this is ugly, and I don't like this. Melcher was living out his attachment to the place in a macabre way. He felt as if everybody did. The house was sacred. Eastman said he loved it so much that he even tried to talk Altobelli into selling it to him, which made me wonder why had he and Burgeon ever moved out. Bugliosi hinted in Helter Skelter that their departure was abrupt, but he never said why. You're going back tomorrow at noon? Yeah, it's her paint shot. That pisses me off. They left in the middle of the night with no warning and 4 months left on the lease, Altobelli told me. Terry blamed it on Ruth Simons, their housekeeper. He said they were frightened of her, that she was domineering and a drunk, that it was the only way they knew to get rid of her. Okay. More like they was scared of Manson, that's what I think. Melcher and Burgeon both are privileged children of Hollywood royalty. Both were privileged children of Hollywood royalty. Were so frightened of a housekeeper that they'd sooner move out of a house they loved than fire her. Power couple, scared of the maid. That doesn't make sense to me either. I'm thinking he was terrified of Manson, had nothing to do with the maid, and that's why they left. Rudy criticizes Terry for leaving behind so many cats when he moved. When I asked him why Terry moved, he tells me it was money that Terry became peeved at the rent, remembering Terry's love of the house and how many times, according to Rudy, that Terry offered to buy the house from him. It seems odd to me that he moved away so suddenly, so abruptly. None of this had ever come out before. Other friends of Melcher agreed that he and Burgeon had snuck out in the middle of the night because of threats from the family. I knew it. Melcher was afraid of them, one source told me. They said, if you don't produce our album, we will kill you. After the murders, Melcher seemed really guilty. He probably felt he should have said to the new tenants, Tate and Polanski, don't rent this house. There are these people who have been harassing me here. Yeah, you think? I talk like that, named Charlotte. And honestly, like she just I'd call her Cow. Her name was Charlotte. Like, come here, Cow. I don't know, it was just a nickname. She wasn't fat or anything, just stuck. I don't know. Like more and she'd love it. So I just pat her bum. She'd sit and go like this, like just loved it. It's cute. Ultimately gave me the number of Carol Wilson, Dennis Wilson's ex-wife. It was after their second separation that Dennis had taken up with Manson and the girls, much to Carol's chagrin. The two shared custody of their two kids. Later, I would hear from a reliable source that Carol had had photos taken at Dennis's house, capturing him cavorting naked around the pool with women from the family. She used them to pressure Dennis, getting him to agree to her terms in the divorce. Oh. Carol kept careful tabs on her ex goings on. She kept a diary from the day Dennis first met Tex Watson. Altabelli told me. It has everything in it, everything on Terry. She hates him. Meanwhile, she pursued a romance with Jay Sebring, which I'd never seen reported before. I didn't know that either. So you're telling me a Beach Boys ex wife was trying to get with Jay Sebring. Okay. It felt significant in light of the fact that her ex-husband had been intertwined with the Sebring killers. It was just before the weekend when I reached Wilson. I told her that I was exploring the possibility of her former husband and his friends had been more involved with the Manson family than previously reported, and I wondered if Manson's reach in Hollywood was further than had been known. Yes, it was, she replied. She asked that I call her back on Monday. We could meet for coffee. When Monday came, though she changed her mind, I thought long and hard over the weekend, she said, and I can't talk to you. There were a lot of people involved, she explained. Too many. It's a scary thing, she said, and anyone who knows anything will never talk. Like, what? I want to know everything, but it's so hard. Everything's secreted. I couldn't draw her out on that. She suggested that I talk to Melcher and Jacobson, but she wouldn't put me in touch. Meanwhile, I'd started to hear more sordid stuff about Melcher's affiliation with the family. Bob April, a retired carpenter who'd been a fringe member of the family, told me with confidence that Manson would supply girls for executive parties that Melcher threw, giving well heeled business types unfettered access to Manson's girls. But what would Manson get in return? That's why everyone got killed, April said. He didn't get what he wanted. Melcher had promised Manson a record deal on day labels, his mother's imprint, but Doris Day took one look at Manson and laughed at him and said, "You're out of your mind if you think I'm going to produce a fucking record for you." Said it to Charlie's face. Melcher and Manson knew each other very well, April said. I've tried to get this out for years. I didn't know that either. Man, this guy's like really digging deep, which I'm proud of. I'm not proud of, I shouldn't say proud of because I don't even know the guy, but I'm happy about. Like, I didn't know that Elvis Presley visited to pay his respects. That's awesome. All right, this next one, it's called The Paper Trail Begins. I was doing shoe leather reporting on a 30-year-old story. The memories I heard were rife with the omissions, contradictions, and embroidery that come with passage of time. I would interview people and then rush to the library to fact check as best I could with what they told me in books about the case, histories of Los Angeles, biographies of organized crime figures, old news clippings, and more. But if I wanted to report the story with veracity, I needed contemporaneous documentary evidence, the paperwork. When sources like Charles Eastman would mention having journals, I would beg them to find them, often calling back repeatedly until they did. But first and foremost, I wanted police reports and trial transcripts. The case had been the longest and costliest in California history, and Bugliosi said that the transcript numbered more than 1 million pages. Where was that? Could I have access to it? Hey, Nun Nun, can you imagine? So the Manson case to date was the most expensive in the history of California. The LAPD told me they destroyed all their investigative reports. They retained some files, but they weren't about to release them to me. How could they have trashed their records of the most infamous case in the history of the city? I didn't believe it. I asked them to put it in writing, and they did, stating in an official letter that a thorough and proper search produced no records. All the evidence had been destroyed. I don't believe it either. I think that there may have been some police ties to this. Like Manson was in that deep. Whatever he's had back then, whether it be charisma or just getting things on people, whether it be a cop or a lawyer or like even Bugliosi or even the girls, the Beach Boys, all of them. Like he had a way of scaring the shit out of people where they did what he wanted. I tuned to unofficial channels. I heard about a researcher named Bill Nelson, an older man who was obsessed with the murders. He self published several books about the case and had a lot of original police reports. Nelson was purportedly a pretty strange guy. He stalked former members of the family and relatives of the victims, trying to befriend them so he could interview them. He became close to Sharon Tate's mother, Doris, even traveling with her to Paris to visit Roman Polanski, but they had some fallings out before her death in 1992. That's creepy. They are scary, yeah. I mean, I do believe that he was capable, well, of anything, really. Whatever was about him, he lured them in with girls and sex and drugs, and he got what he wanted. If you think about it, he was pretty smart. If he brought all those girls around to the Beach Boys, to Wilson, and, he's supplying all these girls, and they were, you know, uh, pleasing these men. did whatever they wanted, or he'd just tell them to do whatever, and they did it. Can you imagine what that would be like? They're all high, they're all drunk. They got these girls who do, they're there at their every whim. They're getting favored and blah blah blah. And then all of a sudden, Manson's like, "Well, I want to be on the record label," and then one of them says yes, and then when they don't do it, like you're dead, basically. Yeah, you're dead. It's kind of smart if you ask me. It's a smart thing to do because that's the way he had control, especially with those women. Wow. I looked at Nelson's website, mansonmurders.com. The fact that he had one, the fact that he had one at all was still something of a novelty in 1999. Regularly updated with accounts of his crusades, the page included an index of crime scene photos, police documents, and interviews, most of which were for sale. Who does that? There was also plenty to suggest his instability. A retired evangelical minister, Nelson boasted of a close and personal relationship with Jesus Christ. He bragged about having attended the United States Secret Service Academy, where his design for the annual class ring was still in use. His exposés of former family members were vitriolic and often ad hominem. He published photographs of some of their children, having stalked them at their homes and schools. What a nut job. You said it too. Nut jobs like that work the same side. Yeah, but I had to admit that he was very thorough researcher, and I was at a loss as to how I could come by these documents otherwise. I swallowed my pride and sent him an email. We met for coffee at Denny's in Costa Mesa one afternoon. Across the table, Nelson looked like a retired accountant. Mid-60s, balding, his silver hair neatly combed on sides, he dressed conservatively in a button-down shirt and khakis. I paid him $40 for copies of the homicide investigation reports, unredacted and numbering almost 100 pages. I know, it's insane. He got these from Earl Deemer, the cop whose interview with Billy Doyle I discussed earlier. Deemer conducted most of the polygraphs for the Tate investigation, and it copied all the police reports, photos, and audio tapes related to the case. How Nelson persuaded him to part with this stuff was a mystery. Some said he bought the files, others that he stole them. He didn't want to tell me. That much was clear. Deemer had since died, and what was left of his records went to Mike McGann, a retired homicide detective who been the lead investigator on the Tate team. McGann lived in Idaho now. Nelson gave me his number. Like Ed Sanders and others, Nelson believed that certain elements of law enforcement knew that the Tate LaBianca murders were planned, or they knew who was behind them. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying too. And I think there's a conspiracy there. Not conspiracy, but they were definitely involved. They knew, and they didn't say anything. They were paid off, something, or or Manson and his family had stuff on these police. They've been unable to act because it would have exposed their secret intelligence gathering operations. Nelson had watched nearly every televised interview Manson had ever given. He felt that Manson never lies, he just withholds information. Okay. But Manson would never tell the truth about the murders. It would involve snitching, and there was no greater transgression in a criminal's mind. Hearing all this at Denny's made my head hurt, but I felt I had to indulge Nelson. In spite of how far-fetched the theory sounded, some of them resonated with me long after I pulled away from the restaurant that day. Back home, I put on some coffee and pulled out the sheaf of papers I just bought, feeling somewhere between eager and anxious. As explained in Helter Skelter, the homicide investigation progress reports were essentially internal summaries. They outlined the detectives' various leads and efforts to break the case, presenting the investigation in all its disarray without Bugliosi's streamlining. The 33-page on the Tate murders first homicide investigation progress report, dated to the end of August 1969. Much of them was workmanlike, describing the activities of the victims and the deeds leading to their deaths, the chronological of the discovery of the bodies, the recovery of the evidence, and so on. When the investigators speculated on the hows, whys, I sat up a bit. They focused on the possibility that Billy Doyle, Charles Tacot, and others had initiated a vengeful massacre after Frykowski welched on a drug deal. The second homicide investigation progress report came 6 weeks later, describing the battery of polygraphs and interrogations through which investigators concluded they hadn't found the killers yet. I expected to see names like Altabelli's and Melcher's everywhere in the two Tate reports, but I was wrong. Melcher wasn't mentioned once, and Altabelli was only referenced in passing. If investigators had looked into the possibility that the man who owned the house or its most recent previous occupant had anything to do with the murders, there was no sign of their efforts here. So they didn't even investigate. That's crazy. As intriguing as these reports were, they were kind of a letdown, and other reporters had already gotten them. If I wanted something new, really new, I'd have to keep pressing. I decided to call Mike McGann, the retired cop who lived in Idaho. If Nelson was right, he'd have the stockpile of documents that dwarfed the collection in my hands. Everything in Vince Bugliosi's book is wrong, McGann told me on the phone. I was the lead investigator on the case. Bugliosi did not solve it. Nobody trusted Bugliosi. McGann spoke in gruff sentences, sometimes no more than a few words or two, always a breath away from hanging up on me. I wanted to know more, but McGann, like others, close to the case, expected to be compensated for his time. And even more so, for his papers. He had the records, he told me, but they were available only for a price. That effectively shut down the conversation. I kept calling McGann and was willing to tolerate my curiosity to a point. I wanted to know about Melcher, Wilson Jacobson, and Altabelli, what they had told the cops and when. What about Carol Wilson and Carol Jacobson, Greg's wife? McGann said he hadn't gone through the files in years, but he'd look if he had a chance. 2 months later, during our sixth conversation, he still hadn't agreed to show me anything for free. McGann said that I'd had 190 written summaries of the interviews by the Tate detectives. Some were only half a page long, most were a page or two. A few were longer. There were no interviews of Melcher, Jacobson, Wilson, or Altabelli, but there were interviews with Carol Jacobson and Carol Wilson. Well, that's strange. He pulled out the latter, dated August 15th, 1969, and started to read a portion over the phone. But soon he stopped and raised his voice. Are you taping this? I'm not going to go for that. I turned off the tape, but he refused to read anymore. Before he totally lost patience, I asked if he could tell me one last thing, the date of the Carol Jacobson interview. He leafed through the pages. August 10th, he said, the day after the bodies were discovered. That meant that both wives, Jacobsons and Wilsons, the two Carols, as Altabelli called them, had spoken to police within a week of their murders. Why not their husbands? And why not Melcher or Altabelli, given their close ties to Cielo home? Where were those interviews? That's what I wanna know because if their wives and other this doesn't make sense. That is weird. So Beach Boy Dennis Wilson's wife was interviewed. So was Carol Jacobson, which was, Melcher's wife. No, no, it wasn't. Um, I can't remember who that one was. Revisiting Cielo Drive. One night after taking Altobelli out to dinner, I drove him home, as I always did. He totaled his car after our first meeting. He was certain someone had run him off the road as a warning to stop speaking to me, and since then, I'd become his de facto chauffeur. Yeah, no worries, Alberta. What the good car in the shop, he'd always say. Our evenings together usually ran 6 or 8 hours, with Altabelli requesting impromptu stops at the supermarket or at a bar for a nightcap. We were close to Benedict Canyon that night, so I took us back to the valley that way. I used to drive this way back to Cielo, he said, beginning to reminisce about the happiest period of my life. When I asked if he'd mind if we drove up to the house, he said, sure, why not? I sensed some reluctance in his answer. Cresting the final hill, we proceeded in silence down the narrow road, stopping at the gated entrance to what had once been 10050 Cielo Drive. The house had been razed in 1994. Erected in its place was Villa Bella, an Italianate mansion of concrete and marble behind a wall, ostentatious gate that concealed most of it from the street. I want to see what number they put on my mailbox, Rudy said, suddenly irritated. Where's my mailbox? I maneuvered the car beside it. 10066, Alberti said, reading the numbers. They had changed. His voice cracked. We had such a great view, he said, gazing from my passenger seat at the silver of the space beyond the gate. It's all so cold looking now. My house was so warm and cozy. His voice broke again, and his breathing was shallow, like he was gasping for air. Let's go, he said after a long pause. Back up now, he said. When we were already halfway down Cielo, he shouted again, just go. We drove back to his apartment in silence. At home, with about half a dozen stray cats greeting him outside, Altabelli perked up, kneeling down to pet each one and calling them all by name. Inviting me in, he apologized for what had happened back at Cielo. It was the first time he returned since he left 10 years before. I lived in the house for 25 years, 4 months, and 38 hours, he said. Now he lived in a converted garage in a neighborhood known for its gang activity. Hanging over his desk was a framed photo of the house from the mid 60s and a watercolor painting of the front gate. Also framed was a letter from Bugliosi commending him for his testimony at the trial. Rifling through old snapshots on his desk, he handed me fading photographs of the celebrities, all taken at 10050 Cielo Drive. The last one was of Terry Melcher, passed out on top of the same desk Altabelli was presently seated at. Melcher's hand gripped an empty bottle of liquor. Booze and pills, Altabelli said. The photo was taken when Melcher was staying with him at the house after the murders. Hi, Benita. No, I don't think anybody's really getting notifications, and that's all right. There's always a replay. In November that year, when the police told Altabelli that Manson was responsible for the murders, the first thing he did was call the two Carrolls. I said because of their husbands, I was stuck with all this. I was left in the lurch. They knew what was happening in the house. Terry Melcher, the investigator of the whole thing. Altabelli seemed to be toying with the idea of letting me in on something bigger. He did this a lot. A seemingly offhand remark would complicate his entire portrait of the period. Terry talked about Manson all the time, he said. He thought he was wonderful. He asked me to manage him, but hadn't Terry said he wanted nothing to do with him? Terry stalked Manson. They thought they had Jesus Christ. I know I miss going live too. It's just I was just saying earlier, I keep getting sick. Jack, my dog, was sick. Claire now, it's like we can't catch a break. And I wish YouTube would ship up or they can ship out kind of thing. Later, when I got transcripts of the trials, I'd see that Altabelli wasn't just embroidering. On the stand, he said that Melcher, along with Wilson and Jacobson, had talked to me on many occasions about Mr. Manson and his philosophy, his way of living, and how groovy it was. Tellingly, in his own testimony, Melcher acted as if he hardly knew the man behind the groovy philosophy. Presented with a photo of Manson, he told the grand jury, I don't know him, but I think I've seen him at Dennis Wilson's house. Later, he revised his story, still stressing that he met Manson no more than 3 times. In other words, even at the time, Melcher's and Altabelli's stories were not straight. Thinking of my talk with Mike McGann, I asked Altabelli if detectives had interviewed him after the murders. Of course he said. He even remembered when it had been on the day of the Tate and Sebring funerals at his lawyer's office. At the trial, he testified to do the same thing. Following his lawyer's instructions, he reminded me he hadn't said anything to the police about Manson. I told Altabelli that McGann had said there was no record of his interview. He was as baffled as I was. A lot of this doesn't add up, like at all. But I think that's the point of this book is to get all of this out in the open so people can finally kind of put together what actually happened with the murders. Well, it might surprise you. With McGann stonewalling me, I paid a visit to Stephen Kay of the Los Angeles DA's office, thinking he might be able to point me toward my more documents. Kay had helped Bugliosi prosecute the case in 1970, joining the trial midway through, a career-making turn for the young lawyer. In the ensuing decades, Kay had served as the government's most prominent voice against Manson and the family, appearing at their parole hearings to argue against the release. He was, after Bugliosi, the legal world's leading expert on the family. I met Kay at his office in Long Beach. When I turned the subject to Melcher, he volunteered something else I had never heard. Manson and Watson, as in Tex Watson, attended a party at Cielo House when Terry and Candy Burgeon lived there, he said. He was confident about this. The information first came out during the trial for Tex Watson, who'd been tried separately from the other family members. Kay had confirmed it was Greg Jacobson. He thought it was another reason that Manson had chosen the Cielo house for the murders. When he sent Wilt Watson and the girls there, he noted that Tex knows the layout of the place. And yet Melcher, in his testimony, had said that he never once saw Watson. Text Watson inside his house. Melcher doesn't want to have anything to do with this. You'll never get to talk to Melcher or Ken Spurgeon, Kay told me. Kay didn't believe that the LAPD had really destroyed their files on the case. For one thing, he said Bugliosi had borrowed what he needed to write Helter Skelter and then conveniently never returned anything. Bugliosi had seen earlier than anyone that the Manson trial was going to be his meal ticket, Kay said. He took the ethically dubious step of installing his writing partner, Kurt Gentry, in the courtroom every day to watch the proceedings in real time. Gentry was working on the book that would become Helter Skelter before anyone was even convicted. Wow, I did not know that. The sensationalism only inflamed Bugliosi's fury. At one point, he grabbed Kay's arm in the courtroom and said to him, Steve, aren't I great? Do you know anyone as great as me? Wow. And Bugliosi was still dining out literally on his Manson stories. Wow. The case continued to earn him a handsome income in royalties and public speaking appearances. It was curious about those who hadn't made out so well, people still living in the shadow of these crimes, who'd been broken by the tumult of the late 60s. They'd have no vested interest in preserving the official's narrative. Through a series of Los Angeles attorneys, I tracked down Irving. Oh, this guy. He was such a, oh my God, he made me laugh, man. He was, I don't know if you guys remember in Helter Skelter, he was always just causing mayhem. It was funny though. So, through a series of Los Angeles attorneys, I tracked down Irving A. Kanarek, Manson's defense attorney. I'd been warned that this was a sad story, but I wasn't prepared for the dire straits I'd find him in. Okay, I didn't know he was in bad shape. Kenrick comes across as a ridiculous figure in Helter. Yes, he does in Helter Skelter. He comes off as an idiot. Like he's just wow. Like he was put in jail numerous times because he kept going against the judges, was just speaking out and just oh. Bugliosi portrays him as an erratic, bombastic blowhard whose obstructionist tactics earned him opprobrium from every corner of the legal world. The book devotes many pages to his history of indiscretions in the courtroom. By the available evidence, Bugliosi wasn't exaggerating here. Kanarek really was a reviled, difficult lawyer, and his conduct in the Manson case bore this out. According to legend, Manson wanted the worst trial lawyer in Los Angeles. Someone told him that Kanarek was his man. He sure did. He was horrible. He objected 9 times during Bugliosi's opening statement alone. You can't do that. By day 3, he racked up an impressive 200 objections. The judge jailed him twice for contempt. Bugliosi conceded that Kanarek could be effective, even eloquent at moments, but this didn't stop him from calling Kanarek in court and in Helter Skelter the tedium. I met this Tuscanini, something like that, standing on the sidewalk in Tony Newport Beach. It was 80 degrees out, but he shuffled up in an oversized winter coat and threadbare sneakers, clutching a battered briefcase held together with twine. Newspapers and plastic bags were poking out. Short and stooped, Kinnerak had an unkempt, patchy gray beard. His hands and face were streaked with dirt. Oh, he's not homeless, is he? As if he hadn't bathed for weeks. There were sores on his body. He was missing most of his teeth. Once Kenrick learned I had a car, he asked me to drive him to Barnes& and Noble, where the cashier handed him a copy of the Los Angeles Times and sent him on his way. It was previous day's paper, he told me. That's why he didn't have to pay for it. That's sad. Then we got lunch outside of Santa Monica Seafood, a relatively upscale chain. Kenrick struck me as sharp but eccentric. His explosive volume led diners at 2 other tables to relocate indoors. He'd shout things like, "Manson didn't kill anyone, and he's the one who should have gotten immunity," or "All Charlie wanted to do was screw girls. He did not know they were gonna murder those people." Most of his diatribes took on Bugliosi, for whom he had endless epithets: liar, cheat, crook, conman, adulterer, stalker, woman beater, son of a bitch, and worse. He shouted, causing another table to flee, an indicated perjurer who used his influence to be acquitted during the trial. When I asked if Kanarek was paid to defend Manson, he smiled wryly and said that he was, but that confidentiality prevented him from revealing by whom. It would be big news, he said. It might surprise you if Kanarek had a benefactor. Another lawyer later told me that White Knight wasn't generous. Kanarek apparently spent most of the trial living out of his car and sleeping in the press room at the courthouse. Over the 10 years prior to our meeting, Kanarek had discovered his wife was cheating on him. He wandered into traffic and been struck by a car. Oh my God. He'd suffered a nervous breakdown and spent time in mental institutions. He'd lost his law firm, his license to practice, and his life savings. Now he was living on Social Security in a motel in Costa Mesa, the next town over. After lunch, I offered to drive him back. He took me up on it, but could I take him on a few more stops before we parted ways? A few more stops turned into 2 harrowing hours in my 1988 Acura. Canarex screamed at me for missing turns that he told me to take just as we were passing them. We drove in circles around Orange County until, to my horror, he announced that he decided to accompany me back to LA, which meant 2 more hours in the car with him during rush hour traffic. Almost as soon as we pulled into the freeway, he was ranting again. When he said again that Bugliosi was an indicted perjurer, I asked him to explain. Belittling me for not having done my homework, Kenrick said that during the Manson trial, someone had leaked the rumor about Manson's celebrity hit list to a journalist named Bill Farr, who'd published in a violation of the court's gag order. The hit list scoop must have come from one of the lawyers on the case. They were the only ones with access to it. With the jury out of the courtroom, the judge made the attorneys swear under oath that they hadn't slipped the information to Farr, who refused to reveal the source. All 6 attorneys denied having done it. After the trial, the judge, still suspicious, impaneled a grand jury to investigate the incident. They indicated two of the attorneys were lying. One was Day Shin, Susan Atkins' defense attorney. The other was Bugliosi. Imagine that. He's a snake. I don't like him at all. Read the grand jury transcript, Kenrick shouted. The state decided to prosecute the case. But if Bugliosi was convicted of perjury, it would jeopardize the verdicts in the Manson trial, and the DA's office couldn't stand for that. They got the judge to dismiss the charges on a technicality. They colluded, that is, to protect the convictions from the longest, most expensive criminal trial in the U.S. history. It was a sweetheart deal, don't you see? Kenrick shouted, his spittle spraying in my face. Ugh. It wasn't mentioned. Are we sure my son's not trying to get hold of me? It wasn't mentioned that in the Helter Skelter, I said. Of course it wasn't, Kenrick scoffed. Neither was the fact that Bugliosi stalked his milkman and beat up his mistress. I should look up those cases too, both of which, he said, had been taken care of because of Bugliosi's political clout. He's a criminal, he shouted, and dangerous too. I thought Kenrick was unstable, so I didn't put much stock in the stories. I was relieved when we got to Hollywood. I wouldn't have to endure any more of his delusions. As he gathered his things and got out, I started to worry about him. It occurred to me that he might have been homeless. I offered him some cash, but he waved it away, asking me instead to promise that I'd look into his claims about Bugliosi. I watched him disappear into the crowd on a low rent end of Hollywood Boulevard. Later that year, when my relationship with Bugliosi began to sour, I find that everything he said was true. Wow. Coda. I'm not the Oracle. I've been sending progress reports to Premiere. The magazine's editor-in-chief, Jim Meggs, was hooked on the story. He was as invested as I was. In the middle of May 1999, the editors agreed to extend my deadline a second time. That meant the piece would be too late for the anniversary of the murders, but it didn't matter, they told me, as long as I could deliver something big. I was relieved, at least in the short term. In the long term, I was starting to feel the pressure of having to produce something mind-blowing, and I had to get it right. And to do that, I had to push harder on my sources, find new ones, and most critically, find more of the documents generated during the investigation. Having heard so often that Terry Melcher would never talk to me, I knew one thing I could do to get my story apart: get Terry Melcher to talk to me. I got his number, but I didn't want to use it until I was sure I had good questions to ask him. I figured I'd only get one shot. I finally called him in early June. He was articulate and from the start, irritable and distrustful. I get so many goddamn calls about this crap from all over the world, he said. Oh shit, that's right. Lips. Um, there we go. I get so many goddamn calls about this crap from all over the world. He said, I don't know anything about this shit. Rudy Altobelli called me for the first time in 10 or 15 years a few days ago and told me the story of the bullets. I don't know if it's real, but so what? What are you going to do? At the time of the murders, I asked, did you suspect Manson? I had no idea whatsoever. I used to audition 3 or 4 bands a week. They all looked the same. They all looked like the cast of Hair. Okay, Hair apparently was what? Like a Broadway show or something? Maybe? Something like that? Sounds like it. Like Hairspray? I had no idea whatsoever. How many times did you meet Manson? Once, very briefly, at Dennis Wilson's house, and the second time at the ranch. But I've spoken to people who claim that you knew them a lot better. I really didn't, Melcher said. Why had he moved into this yellow house so suddenly? It was totally ridiculous to pin that on his fear of Manson, he said. He still blamed his housekeeper, Ruth Simons. It's just hard to believe that someone as powerful as you would move out of the house rather than fire the maid, I said. It's really true. I just couldn't figure out what else to do. Plus, his mom had vacated their Malibu beach house, and he thought it was a good idea to live there to prevent it from falling into disrepair. Next, I probed his friendship with Dennis Wilson. How could he dodge the fact that both of them, plus Greg Jacobson, should have suspected Manson as soon as they learned of the murders? Melcher said his friendship with Wilson had dissolved around the time. As Wilson became increasingly recipient, the rumor was that Wilson knew they were killing people, Melcher said. He was so freaked out he just didn't want to live anymore. He was afraid and he thought he should have gone to the authorities, but he didn't. And then the rest of it happened. So he was in some way just tremendously guilty. Now, I don't know that's true. And the guilt doesn't apply to you too, I asked. I don't think so. Christ, if they wanted to get me, all my doors were wide open that whole summer. After the murders, he'd heard that Wilson met with Bugliosi and all the DAs in the state of California in one great big room, and that Wilson had managed to eke out only one sentence about the family. Well, we hung around and smoked a little pot and sang some songs. Period. That was it. That was his entire statement. Why would Vince settle for that? I asked. I don't know. He thought he just put him on the stand. But he didn't put him on the stand, I said. This is something I've been thinking about a lot. Dennis Wilson would have been a star witness since he knew Manson so well, and he's seen his violent tendencies. If he didn't want to testify, Bugliosi could have subpoenaed him. He did it to force testimony from plenty of others. Why not Wilson? Well, they thought he was nuts. By that time, he was, Melcher said. He had a hard time separating reality from fantasy. Seriously. He had inventions. He tried to sell me one a new he tried to sell me once a new invention that was the size of a cigarette box, an anti-gravity device. You kept it in your glove compartment, but when you get in a traffic jam, you just turn it on and fly right over the other cars. You really thought what? Hi, Misty. Hair was a whole musical album too? Ah, thank you. Oh, you got the whole album? Okay, I figured it was. It sounded like one. Oh my gosh. So Dennis Wilson apparently went nuts. And he gave him a size of a cigarette box, anti-gravity device. Apparently, you keep it in your glove compartment, but when you get into a traffic jam, you just turn it on and fly right over the cars. He really thought it worked. Wow. I had more questions, but I could feel him growing impatient. I'm not the oracle about this thing, Melcher said. I just know that it was an incredible pain in the ass. That's horrible to say about people's murders. Like, really? That pain might continue. Listening back to my tape of the call, I realized that I caught Melcher in a lie, one that implicated Bugliosi and gave me my best shot yet at proving that both of them were involved in the cover up. Oh, shit. Chapter 4 The Holes in Helter Skelter. Morehouse moves in. As my trust in Bugliosi faltered, I kept revisiting Helter Skelter, turning its pages in search of some detail that felt forced or wrong, especially where Telly Melcher was concerned. One day, a few sentences jumped out at me. After Terry Melcher had moved out of the Cielo Drive residence, but before the Polanskis had moved in, Greg Jacobson had arranged for Dean Morehouse to stay there for a brief period. During this time, Tex Watson had visited Morehouse at least 3 times and possibly as many as 6 times. Emphasis mine, something about that offhand phrasing, a Dean Morehouse was a red flag for me. This was the only time Morehouse was mentioned in the book. He had been a member of the family, a wavering Protestant minister, insurance salesman, and married father of three. He was living in San Jose when he first encountered Manson in 1967 when the ex-cons was fresh out of federal prison and hitchhiking. Morehouse pulled over to give him a lift, which turned into an invitation to dinner, which blossomed into a friendship of sorts. Morehouse, who stayed from the ministry and was himself on probation for a forgery charge, was searching for something new and was eager to discuss spirituality. Manson was eager to oogle Morehouse's 15-year-old daughter, Ruth Ann. What? That's disgusting. He's disgusting. Before long, Manson absconded with Ruth Ann on a trip up the California coast, prompting her mother to report her to the police as a runaway. Dean Morehouse had left the marriage by then. He'd fallen under the spell of the 60s and grown a long white beard. By March 1968, he was in trouble with the law again, facing an arrest for contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Police had found him when they raided a home in search of marijuana. Soon afterward, he was arrested again, this time for selling LSD. The legend is that Manson persuaded him to try it for the first time, after which he renounced his early possessions. Morehouse kept chasing his daughter, who remained with the family. Manson had rechristened her Osage. When Morehouse followed them to Dennis Wilson's house, Pacific Palisades, Manson kneeled and kissed his feet, launching a charm offensive that effectively ended the conflict. Increasingly sympathetic to the family's philosophies, Morehouse moved into the back cabin and lived there rent free for exchange for maintaining the landscaping Manson had converted a one time Christian minister. But when had Morehouse taken up residence in Seattle home? Melcher told me that he had no memory of it. Bugliosi wrote that it was after Melcher moved out, meaning in January 1969. I found Morehouse in the phone book and gave him a call. He was friendly, though spacey. Now 79, he was living in Northern California under the name Baba. Nice. Which Manson had given him. He had more than 400 LSD trips between 1967 and 1972. That is insane. When I talk to you, I'm talking to myself, he explained. When you talk to me, you're talking to yourself. Oh my gosh, I couldn't. Be that as it may, he had a sharp recall for his time with Manson, and what he told me didn't vindicate Melcher Bugliosi in the slightest. It was impossible that he moved into the Seattle house in January 1969 for one simple reason. He had gone to prison then. Morehouse had been arrested on a drug charge in California. In the midst of his time with the family, he had to head back north for his trial. They convicted me in December of 68, he said. I was due back there at the end of December for sentencing, and then on January 3rd, they hauled me off to Vacaville, a correctional facility. Morehouse said he really lived at Cielo off and on throughout the summer of 68 when Melcher lived there. Terry was a good friend, he explained. When I first met him at Dennis's, he said, if it's okay with you, I'll send my chauffeur down one of these days and have you come up to my house. Meltzer took me in and showed me a bedroom and said, this is your bedroom. You can stay here anytime you want. So I was staying there off and on whenever I felt like it. He also confirmed a detail from Ed Sanders, the family, that Melcher had let him borrow his Jaguar for the long drive to IKEA. I drove the Jaguar up there with Tex Watson. He said Melcher gave it to me to use on this trip, and he gave me his credit card to use for gas and anything that happened to the car. I asked Morehouse for written proof of this time in prison. With his permission, I got a copy of the parole records from the state of California. It showed that he entered the prison system on January 2nd, 1969. So Bugliosi's timeline was wrong, and Melcher lied to me. I felt I had talked to Melcher about this, though. I knew it angered him. He might cut me off afterwards. Still, I'd call him up and laid out the evidence as gingerly as I could. Melcher wasn't having it. He stuck to the story as Bugliosi had told in Helter Skelter and promptly got rid of me. Sick. I lost mine. It's very hard. It's very hard. I lost everything, my health card, my SIN card, my birth certificate, everything. I had to start from scratch, and that was because um, I dated an asshole and he stole my purse. Yeah, it took me months, a long time. Not long after, I got a disturbing call from Rudy Altobelli, sounding more upset and angry than I'd ever heard him. He'd been in touch with Melcher for the first time in many years. The conversations had left him feeling out of the loop. In Altobelli's eyes, the golden perpetrators, Jacobson, Wilson, and Melcher, had always known that Manson had spent time up at the house, but they were too scared to say it on the stand. That task fell to Altobelli, who now felt he'd been pressured into talking about it under oath without understanding the full story. Once they started talking again, Altobelli and Melcher about Dean Morehouse, with my reporting in mind, Melcher had snapped, saying he was going to call Bugliosi. Vince was supposed to take care of all of that, he said, and now it's all resurfacing. Boy. All right, I'll read one more and then I'm gonna stop just because my voice is getting sore. My throat, not voice. My voice don't have feelings. Melcher's lies. Stephen K. of the Los Angeles DA's office told me to call another longtime employer there, Sandy Gibson. Sorry, employee there. She might be sympathetic to my aims. Before she worked for the DA, Gibson had been a journalist, and her coverage of the Manson trial left her deeply skeptical of Bugliosi and his motives. She became one of the several reporters who believed that Bugliosi was corrupt, arrogant, vain, even crazy. Later, he pursued elected office. She wrote a number of stories detailing his misconduct as a prosecutor. Wow. I took Gibson's out to lunch and found her impressively forthright. Soft spoken and direct, she was certain that Bugliosi had covered up for Terry Melcher during that trial. The two must have made some kind of deal. You testified to this, and I'll keep you out of that. She also confirmed that Bugliosi had stolen a bunch of the DA's files for the book, knowing full well that it was illegal to remove them. It bothered her that he was always portrayed as an upstanding and above board. He was a snake. Wow. Yeah, it is. It is like pulling teeth. Yeah, it's sickening, right? Oh, shoot. Yeah, that might be an issue. She could still recall the sight of a vein throbbing in his temple. If I ever saw that vein, she warned me, it meant that Bugliosi was about to blow his stack. Once I'd earned her trust, she agreed to show me that DA's Manson file. I could make photocopies of everything I wanted, though she would have to supervise me as I went through everything. She was under no obligation to show me any of these documents, and though she never said it, I was under the impression that my visits weren't exactly authorized. Gibson led me through the labyrinth of the DA's office and unlocked a storage room. Long, narrow, and windowless, the room accommodated a row of cabinets with barely enough space for the two chairs that Gibson and I carried in. I leafed through the endless folders containing police reports, interviews, notes, investigations, summaries, chronologies, photographs, rap sheets, mugshots, suspect lists, and best of all, half a dozen or more faded legal pads of Bugliosi's interviews with his most prized witnesses. I made notes and set aside my documents I wanted to copy. Gibson had to clear them, but she proved everything at a glance. Several times she called my attention to folders that had nothing in them, telling me that Bugliosi or Bill Nelson had removed their contents. I spent hours in that room, returning 4 times in the next few weeks and several more times in ensuing years. On my third visit, I struck gold, a long yellow legal pad with pages of notes scrawled in black ink, much of it crossed through but still legible. It was an interview of one of Bugliosi's key witnesses, Danny DiCarlo, who testified for 8 consecutive days, often under blistering cross examination. A biker from Venice in a gang called the Straight Satans, DiCarlo began staying at the Spawn Ranch in the spring of '69. He and his associates began a degree of security that endeared him to Manson, who'd grown paranoid and embattled. DiCarlo's father was in the firearms business, and although Danny was never a full-fledged member of the family, he soon ran their arsenal, a cache of weapons that grew to include a submachine gun. Oh, that's lovely. In exchange, he and the other bikers got access to drugs and the family's girls. His testimony did a lot of heavy lifting for Bugliosi. He detailed Manson's plan to ignite the Helter Skelter race war. He outlined the ways Manson dominated his followers, and he identified the weapons used in the murders. In the crossed out sections of Bugliosi's notes, to my astonishment, DiCarlo described 3 visits by Terry Melcher to the Manson family after the murders. Oh my gosh. Wow. I read them, I reread them, and I reread them again. I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing. I took scrupulous word for word notes in case Gibson looked too closely at the flag pages and realized that they were completely appended one of the most important cases in her office's history. Luckily, she let me photocopy them without a second glance. At home, I looked again. I hadn't imagined it. In an interview on February 11th, 1970, DiCarlo described Melcher's two visits to the Spawn Ranch in late August and early September 1969, and his third visit to Barker Ranch, more than 200 miles away in mid-September. According to Bugliosi's notes, DiCarlo's approach, sorry, sorry. According to Bugliosi's notes, DiCarlo didn't approach Melcher on any of these occasions, so he didn't know what Melcher and Manson discussed, but he was certain each time that it was Melcher he saw. Bugliosi's notes on the two visits to the Spawn Ranch read, DiCarlo released 72 hours after the bus on 8/16/69. We went back to Venice for a few days and then we went back to Spawn Ranch. Week and a half later, we went up to Barker with Tex and Bruce Davis in a flatbed truck. Manson and four or five girls left at the same time in a car. The rest of the family stayed at Spawn. Between time that Danny returned to the ranch and time he left for Barker, definitely saw Melcher out at Spawn Ranch. Heard the girls say, Terry's coming, Terry's coming. Melcher drove up in a metro truck by himself. Melcher stayed for 3 or 4 hours. 3 or 4 days later, saw Melcher in the same truck. Then he writes of the third visit, which occurred in the canyon passageway to the family's hideouts in Death Valley. 1.5 weeks later, Melcher and Gypsy and Brenda at bottom of Gawler Wash near Ballarat, sitting in a car with the girls. DiCarlo was with Sadie, Tex, Manson, Bruce, and Dennis, witnesses child on foot. All of them got in Melcher's car. Everyone in the car. Brenda had been the driver, Melcher only a passenger. Everyone called Melcher Terry. Charlie took over the driver's seat and drove to Bridger Crest and picked up a 1959 Buick. DiCarlo and rest then drove off, leaving Melcher, Manson, and Brenda in the car they had. That's the last time witness saw Melcher. I cross-referenced this with the trial transcripts, and I photocopied at the California Court of Appeals, pulling Melcher's testimony from my filing cabinet. I saw that at the grand jury hearing in December 1969, Bugliosi had asked him whether he ever saw Manson after his May 1969 visit to Spawn Ranch. No, I didn't, Melcher replied under oath. So he lied. Imagine that. During the trial, Bugliosi asked him again after a second occasion that you went to Spawn Ranch, which was a couple of days after May 18th, 1969. Did you ever see Mr. Manson thereafter? No, Melcher said, again under oath. Next, he was cross-examined by the defense, Paul Fitzgerald. Do you recall the last time you saw Charles Manson? Yeah, just a few days after May 18th at the ranch. What the fuck? So he says no to Bugliosi on the trial and says he did not see Manson after. Then he was cross-examined by the defense, Paul, and he said he did see him just a few days after May 18th at the ranch. What the hell? Three different times on the stand, always as a witness for Bugliosi, Melcher lied about not seeing Manson after May 1969. Next, I pulled out Danny DeCarlo's testimony to see if Bugliosi had ever asked him about Melcher. It never happened. This was a stunner, never before revealed. Without DeCarlo's testimony, Bugliosi said he might never have gotten his convictions. Only Linda Kasabian, the member of the family who testified in exchange for immunity, spent more time on the stand. Clearly, this was information Bugliosi didn't want before the jury. But why? Was it simply because any post-murder visits by Melcher undermined the helter-skelter motive? Bugliosi argued that Manson chose the Cielo House to instill fear in Melcher, as Susan Atkins said, but if Melcher were with Manson after the murders, where was the fear? Wow. And most important, what were these additional meetings about? Maybe Melcher knew that the family was behind the murders, but for some reason believed he was safe. Was that the secret Bugliosi was hiding? And if so, to whose benefit? As I read the DA's file more carefully, I found that every single thing DiCarlo and Bugliosi had discussed that day was later repeated by DiCarlo on the witness stand, except the descriptions of Melcher's visit after the murders. In his notes, Bugliosi had crossed out all of these references, so they both willingly lied, the prosecutor and the witness. The defense should have received a copy of the DiCarlo's interview. Bugliosi was legally required to turn over all his evidence to the other side. As soon as I could, I scheduled a lunch with the defense, Paul Fitzgerald, to see if he knew anything about this. We met at his favorite dim sum restaurant downtown near the courthouse. Fitzgerald, an ex-boxer who was legendary in LA, Legal circles was his usual animated self, loud, vulgar, slapping the table to make his points, already into his second martini before the first course arrived. Wasting no time, showed him the documents I copied at the DA's, trying not. This is Vince Bugliosi's handwriting, he said. I never saw this before. Obviously, they didn't want to put this on evidence. Fitzgerald and the defense team had paid a lot of attention to DiCarlo, thinking he might be an asset to them. He was not a member of the family, had a good relationship with the truth, lived at the ranch, was an outsider, pretty straightforward guy in most ways, credible. I liked him. He didn't embellish anything, told it the way it was. That made this document all the more legitimate in Fitzgerald's eyes and more sensational. I'm very shocked, he argued, that Bugliosi, who was extremely deceitful, and the robot he claimed his defendants were. He had written a script for the entire trial, getting witnesses to agree to his narrative in advance. This is disgusting. Wow. I was relieved by Fitzgerald's astonishment. It convinced me that I wasn't overreacting here. Wanting to eliminate any possible doubt, I tried for a few months to find Danny DiCarlo himself, but he seemed to have vanished. I did eventually track down a girlfriend of his who told me that she'd gotten my interview request to him. He lived mainly in Mexico these days and said I never heard back from him. I felt it was becoming nearly impossible to deny that Bugliosi had manipulated some of his witnesses, or that he complied with them, at least two of his principals, to conceal the facts of the case and shore up his motive. If Melcher and DiCarlo were tainted, and if Melcher had committed outright perjury, suborned by Bugliosi, then the veracity of the prosecutor's entire case, including the extraordinary hippie race war motive that made him a best-selling author, was called into question. Wow. Unbelievable the shit I'm finding out about this Bugliosi. He's dead now, so it's like, what can you do, right? Except me and other people read books and get the truth out there. Wow. I don't know the Mary changed my name and I got doors. Yeah, it would be. I never do that to kids. They go to school as 2, 3, 4, I come home being forced to be known as 5. Yeah, I bet. Gosh, her husband, Nun Nun, is like he worships her big time. You got him too, yeah. I'm the same. It's there. I think you can feel it. You know it's there. Absolutely. By things you hear, even certain smells, intrusive thoughts, night terrors, which I suffer from bad. That's PTSD, big time. Yeah, and the Corsair service, oh yeah. Really. Yeah, Stella's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Yeah. No, like I almost want to say jealous, but it's not jealousy. It's like proud. Proud to know you and proud of the fact that after everything you've been through, Alberta, like, you have this amazing husband. He loves you, he adores you, he worships you, and then you got this amazing dog. You got the dogs, and of course, your bird. We dubbed a birdie. Yeah. You got a good life, and honestly, you deserve it after everything you've been through. Yeah, he doesn't just worship you, he just loves me, exactly. Yeah, I don't know, maybe I should get I remember you were saying I should get a dog like that, but I already have Jack, and my house is very small. I live in a two-bedroom bungalow. It's all 1 floor. When I first moved in, it seemed big, but that's because I didn't have anything, and now, um, I have a house, and it's full of stuff I've collected, stuff I've bought. Yep. none. If you're feeling better tomorrow, do you want to do this again? I'm just thinking that, maybe I should just read this every night if you don't mind. And if you aren't feeling up to it, or obviously if I'm not feeling up to it, then we'll skip a day. But I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe we should just read this every night. That way we don't forget where we left off and just kind of finish it because it is good and I want to keep going. I really like to enjoy this book. So thank you for recommending it. So I'd like to finish it, just keep going every day. And then once I have this one done, I've got to finish the other one with autistic. That's fine. Okay. So I'm thinking 7 every night. That's usually, I don't know why 7 just seems to be like a good, yeah, please do. Okay. Because I can't keep stopping these books. I've started so many. Jack the Ripper. I've started the UFO one. Um, oh my God. Even the Paul Bernardo one, I started and haven't finished it. I don't think I can do it. I think what I'm gonna do is just read the rest of it on my own time and just put it out there. That way the book is finished and just keep it in the playlist. That's what I'm thinking. We'll just, all right, none. Yeah, uh, Eastern time. Yeah, Misty, it is good. I mean, I read Helter Skelter. I do have a playlist on that, and I just couldn't wait to get done that book. It's almost annoying because Bugliosi, you could tell in the book that he was very obsessed with himself and very confident, annoyingly confident, and narcissistic, and it was just like I don't know. It was like he had to put his foot on it. He wrote the book. I get it, but I don't know. It was really iffy to me. And now reading this book, and it's how many pages here? It is 521 pages, and I am on page 124. So I still have a lot to read. Um, yeah, I've only read that much, I think. Yeah, just this much. So I still have a lot to read. That's what I mean. And I'm like, I'm so glad you recommended this because now with the real evidence and facts that Tom O'Neill has actually gotten, I believe this because there was a lot of questions I had that I couldn't get answers to with Bugliosi. I mean, I think a lot of them are Misty. I would think so, but man, that Bugliosi was just way too much. I am sad though that Canarek is. I think he's homeless. I agree. I think he's homeless. He's missing teeth. Looks like he hasn't showered, and you know, um, what happened? Like he got a shitty end of the deal. He really did. I thought he was hilarious in the other book. Like it was just like every time I turned around, Canarek was doing something for the defense. Um, but then when I read that he's like this hard up. Shit. But then when he says, looking at Bugliosi at what I said, and turns out it was all true. I mean, I really believe this guy. I really do. I really enjoy this book, and I'm really glad I read it because this is covering things that I didn't even know. This is telling me things that weren't even out in the trial, or things that Bugliosi had hidden. Like he perjured himself big time. He lied. He covered up things. He's just wow, amazing what you find out. And there's pictures in here as well, which I will post in my community tab. I got a couple pages worth. Just thinking when I should start posting. It says right here's picture here. It says Charles Manson sitting with opposite his lawyer, Irving Kenrick, at the 1970 trial for the Tate LaBianca brothers. There's Bugliosi right there in the middle. Made millions. That's the difference between an investigative journalist to a self-ego-centered author like Bugliosi. Yeah, and also a narcissistic person who claims they're a journalist when they're actually not. A female, we all know. You thought the same as me, Alberta. Great minds. Oh, all right. So that's my plan. 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm gonna go live and I'm gonna read this book for about an hour, hour and a half, just so we can get through it. Because I don't want to put it down. Like I want to read more and be like, whatever. I'm just gonna sneak over here. No, I can't. I'll read it with you guys. Then I'll finish the other UFO book I was doing with Autistic, and then I don't know. I think yeah, I want to read this one really, really bad. Really, really bad. Like, I'm obsessed with this. I don't know why. Just and there's a new person was finally they found a match for some bones. Finally, they found out who it was. They just have to contact family. You and your ramen. I think it's gonna blow my mind too, and I really do. And I really think that I think I have sort of an idea just how far this little bastard will go, you know. Ramen and roast beef. You're obsessed with ramen, eh? But it's easy. I don't blame you. Just like KJ. I think I'll be picking out on these. They're pumpkin spice. Yummy. And then my favorite cheesies in the whole world. They're so good. I gotta stop eating so much junk food though. I'm getting a little bit chunky in the face. A little bit. Whatever, I don't care. Nothing's coming between me and my fat food. All right, so that's the plan. Every night at 7, and I'll still continue to do videos every day. That way, I can have the short videos or whatever. I have Katie, get that done and over with, and then go back to what I love doing, which is the true crime. I'm not looking that up. Hell no. For you to suggest that, it's gonna make me want to do it, but I'm not gonna do it. Oh, with cookie butter. Exactly. I was just gonna say, plus your wheelchair bound, yeah. There was also like an apple one, a green apple one, but they sold out before I got there. So I just grabbed the pumpkin spice ones. They're actually really good. So they're the long chewy ones. Yeah, I'm a junk food person too. I've always been that way. I love my Coke Zero or Diet Coke. So they're these ones, they're really chewy ones. It's got a pumpkin on it. I love pecans. I love everything. Anything and everything. I'll eat it. No, I don't think I'm fat. I feel like I might be getting like a little bit. A little bit. Wobble wobble. Plus my age too. I don't know. I guess when you're getting older, you get whatever. You don't like them? I love almonds. I love pecans. I like everything. Exactly. Soft and chewy with that awesome surprise. Yes. Oh, I'll do it. I'll try it. I actually have brownies, but I don't have pecan. If I can find them on sale, I'll buy them. And I like also I like everything. Though I'll tell you what I don't like. What I don't like is honeydew melon and cantaloupe. I got sick off it when I was young. Yeah, same. Gatorade. Actually, there was a deal on down at Shoppers. I need to get it. There was like a 18 pack of the Gatorade, like the big ones, an 18 pack on. It was only on for 11.99. I was like, oh, I'm gonna get it. Yeah, same. I eat whatever I want. Pralines, they're good too, especially the chocolate ones. Dr. Pepper's all you drink. I love Dr. Pepper. Apparently, Diet Dr. Pepper is supposed to be really good. Yeah. Right now, I'm drinking a really warm Diet Coke, but you can't stand it. I love watermelon. That I really do enjoy. Dr. Pepper, I listened to a YouTube video about it recently. It was made before Coke and Pepsi. Really? You love pecans? Pecans. Yeah, I think that's about all I eat. Oh, and some seafood I won't eat either. I've had crab legs, which I like. I like lobster. I've had scallops in like a stew. It's like a creamy bacon white wine. a little small portion. That was delicious. Uh, I haven't tried them on their own. Now, the way Gordon Ramsay makes them, I would go to his restaurant and eat those. I don't like I don't like shrimp either. I did when I was pregnant. I'll never try them again. Ugh. 1885. I used to be severely picky when I was younger. I'm glad I'm not, because that's like my drug is food. Because I don't do anything. I'm boring. I don't even drink. I don't do nothing. But then again, who wants to sit here and drink themselves? I definitely don't. Hey, Suzanne, you get your own fresh lobster? See, I have to get mine frozen. I could never. Nah, I couldn't cook it alive. I remember the first time I saw that done and I didn't realize what was going on. And you know how they say you hear them scream, but it's not. Oh, took me a long time to go to Red Lobster after that. You didn't know the history of Dr. Pepper? That's awesome. I love fish. I love salmon. I love rainbow trout and cod. Oh, yeah. It's just the shrimp. I can eat coconut like shrimp. I've had that before, but I don't think I eat a lot of it. Maybe a tuna sandwich. Yeah. I like salmon sandwiches with mayo, salt, pepper, and some cucumber, even green onions. Yeah. I don't drink and was 50 the first time I used weed. I used to smoke it like I wasn't allowed, like when I was really young, like 14, 15, 16. I don't know. I just don't like the way it makes me feel. But I did get some for pain, and that's better. I will smoke that if I'm in a lot of pain. Yeah, I used to drink too much. I'm glad I don't anymore. Oh, because of mercury, eh? Yeah, they don't scream. But it's like, isn't that their voice, not their voice box, like air coming out of them when they're boiled alive, though? Because you can hear it. You never tried weed? Well, if you haven't, I don't know. I don't want to say don't try it, but I don't want to tell you to try it because as long as you get it from an actual store, not on the street, I would try it. Yeah, I haven't drank since Thanksgiving. No, yeah, Thanksgiving. Yeah, I like the edibles too. They're better. And then, of course, my aunt, she makes me the chocolates. I swear by them. Oh, you're forced to eat salmon 3 times a day. I wouldn't even be able to look at it. All right, I should go. I need to figure out when my son's coming home. I know it's Friday, but still. I was wondering what the hell happened. Well, thank you for joining me, guys. And like I said, I'll be back every night at 7 p.m. I'm going to make that commitment. Hey, Marcy. And make that commitment because I got to get through these books, like I said, and I want to just work on this one. Then I'll do the other UFO one that I started, and then I'll switch to either the Britney Spears one, the Jill Duggar one, or Box Elder Farm. Yeah, I used to smoke too. I quit 2 years ago, so now I just vape. All right, you guys have a great night. Thank you for joining me. And I'll be back tomorrow with another KJ video as usual because she just doesn't shut up and uh, there's always something. And then I'll be back at 7 for more chaos reading. All right, you guys have a great night. Bye.